Welcome to the Roy Morgan Weekly Update. In another big week, we've seen more records tumble with the ANZ Roy Morgan key indicators as the fuel crisis continues. Consumer confidence is down again to a record low, 58.8. Inflation expectations are up again to a record high, 7.3%. And support for the federal government rises after a landslide election victory for the ALP in South Australia. Now, although the official economic numbers aren't in yet and won't be for months, Roy Morgan indicators show Australia is already in a recession, at least as far as Australians are concerned. First, consumer confidence is now down for a fifth straight week. ANZ Roy Morgan consumer confidence fell 4.3 points to 58.8, a second consecutive record low, and the first time the index has ever dropped below 60. Consumer confidence has now fallen 21.4 points in the last 5 weeks since Israel and the United States began attacking Iran a month ago. The biggest driver of the fall this week was loss of confidence in the economy's performance over the next 5 years. That was down a net 8 percentage points this week. The biggest driver of the multi-week fall over the last 5 weeks is less confidence about the economy's performance over the next year, the next 12 months, down a net 28%. Also driving that multi-week fall is less confidence about current buying conditions. This index has fallen by a net 23 percentage points over the last 5 weeks. All in all, confidence has dropped across the board over the last month. Now, analysis of consumer confidence by age shows an interesting trend. Although still low, consumer confidence in recent weeks is noticeably higher for the youngest, 71.3 for people aged under 25, and for the oldest, at 63.3 for people aged 65 and over. These are the people most likely to be either studying or retired, and least likely to be in the workforce. In contrast, consumer confidence is at record lows for people aged 25 to 34 on 59.7, people aged 35 to 49 on 53.4, and people aged 50 to 64, 51.4. These are the people most likely to be in the workforce, raising young families and paying off large household mortgages. All issues now providing increasing financial stress. So consumer confidence for these working age groups has fallen by around 25 points or more since the war began. Since the war started, Australia's inflation expectations have continued to soar. ANZ Roy Morgan inflation expectations increased 0.4% to 7.3% this week, a new record high since 2010. This means Australians expect annual inflation of 7.3% in each of the next 2 years. Inflation expectations have now jumped 2.1 percentage points in the last 5 weeks as Australians factor in petrol price increases as well as the flow-on costs to food and other goods. Inflation expectations have jumped at different rates for different age groups, and increasingly the most for younger people and the least for older people. Inflation expectations are up most for young people under 25. They're up 3% to 8.3%. That makes them easily the highest of any age group, and up 2.5% to 7.6% for the second highest. In contrast, inflation expectations for people aged 65 plus are up only 1.3 percentage points to 6.7%. That makes them now the lowest for any group. And of course, driving this rise in inflation expectations is petrol prices at the pump, which hit a record high of $2.53 per litre just last week. Petrol prices have jumped 87 cents since mid-February, a 52.6% increase. On this front, there's some good news this week, with the Albanese government announcing a 3-month cut to the fuel excise, a cut that will effectively cut petrol prices at the pump by almost 30 cents a litre. This should provide motorists some relief this week, heading into the Easter holiday period. The chart of inflation expectations and average petrol prices shows both moving in unison in recent weeks, straight up. On the political front, it's been a good week for the Labor government, following on from a landslide election victory in South Australia for popular Premier Peter Malinauskas. The latest Roy Morgan poll last week shows the federal two-party preferred result has the ALP at 56.5%, up 4 percentage points, well ahead of the LNP coalition on 43.5%, based on how electors said they would vote or allocate their preferences. So if a federal election were held now, the ALP would be returned to government with a large majority, according to interviewing conducted by Roy Morgan from March 23 to 29, with a representative Australia-wide cross-section of 1,562 electors. However, Roy Morgan government confidence remained very low. Now, 59.5% of electors say the country's going in the wrong direction. Only 25% say the country's going in the right direction. This means the Roy Morgan government confidence rating was at just 65. That's 35 points below the neutral level of 100. Among ALP supporters, government confidence is high at 127.5. But for supporters of all other parties, it's well below the neutral level of 100. Green supporters have government confidence of 70, Coalition supporters on only 35, and One Nation supporters on just 15. Interestingly, supporters of independents and other parties have government confidence of 56.5. The ALP primary vote was up 3% to 30%. LNP coalition was down 3% to 22.5%. Liberals were down 2% to 19.5%, and Nationals were down 1% to 3%. Support for other parties was unchanged, with One Nation on 23.5%, Greens on 13.5%, and Independents and other parties on 10.5%. Now looking across the Tasman to the political situation in New Zealand, and the latest results are extremely tight. With an election due later this year, the two sides are essentially even. The National-led government on 47.5% and the Labor-led parliamentary opposition on 48%. Comparing the two sides of politics, the National-led government is made up of National on 26.5%, NZ First on 11%, and ACT on 10%. Support for the Labor-led parliamentary opposition includes Labor on 34%, the Greens on 11%, and the Maori Party on 3%. The survey results for March would lead to both sides winning 60 seats each, a parliamentary tie. Now, looking forward to next week, I'll be back to bring you the latest data for business confidence, consumer confidence, inflation expectation, and the latest voting intention. The nation today is at a fragile stage. These ANZ Roy Morgan indicators of how Australians feel have never been more important. Those who follow economic cycles know that how people feel about events and situations is more important than the event itself. Look forward to seeing you next week.